Good evening and welcome everyone to Why Not's Her, His, and Our History. According to George Santayana, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Or Winston Churchill, who said, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So, whether you remember our history or you learn from our history, the outcome and the impact is the same. We are destined to repeat it. Joining us this evening are Dr. Senator Mamie Locke and a senator in Virginia. Welcome. And Tanya Coles, an instructor. And we will be anticipating someone else who will represent his story, and that would be Robert Gibbons. So when he joins us, we'll bring him in. So, good evening, everyone. So, as we're talking about history, ladies, can you give us a background of your history? So, we'll start with the Senator, Dr. Locke.
Well, um, I guess my history began um, in Mississippi. I was born in Mississippi, spent a little bit of my childhood in Alabama, on the Gulf Coast of Alabama, before my family moved back to Mississippi. And I spent the greater part of my childhood there and went to high school there. Um, and one can say that I was raised in the Jim Crow South. Don't remember much about that because I can say that I knew that it was segregated, and I knew that um, my school was segregated. But I had teachers who were interested in my learning and did a lot to ensure that I learned. Um, and my high school was integrated when I believe I was in the 10th grade. Um, and so, but it wasn't one of those things where you saw this big change in terms of integration. Um, and because my high school wasn't one of those that um, saw an influx of white students. There were white students there, but there wasn't like this big influx of white students that came to the school. But what I did see was that a lot of the better teachers, African American teachers, were pulled from that school and put in some of the other schools. Um, and and I think that the only reason why my school wasn't closed was because it was on the National Register of Historic Places. But the other black high schools were closed or were made into what we call middle schools today. And the white high schools were the ones that were maintained. Um, and and because my high school was on the national, and let me tell you why I was on the National Register of Historic Places. Um, if you're familiar with Lerone Bennett, um, who wrote Before the Mayflower, and he was on the staff of um, Jet magazine for a while, and also on the staff of Ebony magazine. He was a staff writer. He went to high school there. And also uh, Richard Wright uh, went to school there um, for a short time before he left and went to Memphis. So these are folks who kind of made their way through this school. So it because of their presence at this school, it had some historic folks who kind of came through and passed through. So because of that, um, that's why I got on the National Register fairly early. So they couldn't tear it down. So and they couldn't close it. And but it and I mine was one of those histories that um, I tell young people this all the time. I was supposed to be a statistic. I grew up in public housing. I was one of 11 children, raised by a single parent. And I was supposed to be an unwed teenage mother. I was supposed to be a substance abuser. I was supposed to be all of these things that's supposed to happen to somebody who was raised under the circumstances under which I was raised. Um, and so, why didn't that happen? It didn't happen because I had those teachers who said, you are going to learn because there are folks out there who don't believe that you can. And you are going to do better because there are folks out there who don't believe that you can do better. And you're going to use your brain for something other than those things that people believe that you are not capable of doing. And I remember my eighth grade algebra teacher uh, said to our class one day, there are folks out there who don't believe that you can learn this stuff. Let's show them differently. And let's prove differently to that community out there who don't believe that Black people can learn math. Let's show them differently that you can. So I remember Black teachers at my high school. And my school was a combined school. I went there from 7th through 12th grade. So and so it was like you learn. I had teachers who were like, you are going to learn this stuff. You are capable of learning, and you will be a better person, and you're going to go out into this world and conquer and be better than the circumstances in which you find yourself. So that was kind of like my history, and you're going to be above and beyond the circumstances in which you find yourself right now.
Well, thank you, Dr. Locke. And I know, Tanya, that must have been music to your ears, given that you are an instructor and hearing the impactful role that it played in Dr. Locke's life. Share us your personal history.
Yes, I was getting a headache from nodding from Dr. Locke because I can identify with many parts of her story. So I too was supposed to be a statistic. I grew up with a single mother in public housing. So I'm from Newport News, Virginia. And so we have the trademark bad news because there's no good news that's supposed to come out of Newport News. Well, I hate to tell everyone, there's much good news that comes out of Newport News. I grew up in Aqueduct Apartments. And so if you know the area, that is definitely not the prime area of Newport News. So lots of my childhood was marked with people called it the hood. I called it home. So it was home for me. The loud music that played as we ran around from playground to playground, trying to get home before those streetlights came on. I never did, so I always got in trouble for it. But the iceberg lady, the green thing that we played on, those mark my history, and it makes me smile when I still see some of those things in existence today. I was a part of an initiative, probably a very modern version of busing or integration. I went to one of the first in Kiln Creek, which is a prominent area in Newport News. They opened a new school and they were intentional about getting children from Aqueduct to go there. I remember very much the pushback of not wanting children that looked like me to attend that school because it was not designed for children like me. When the magnet system was first created in Newport News, I was one of the first groups that attended magnet school. Once again, pushback because it wasn't created for children that came from where I came from and that looked like me. So a lot of my childhood is marked by the foundations that my mother set. She was an unwed mother. She received her GED, but what she was ensuring is instilling in us is education. She stressed that. She says, now you're going to graduate from high school now. What you choose to do after high school, I will leave that up to you. She left it up to me. And so I went to school, got a few degrees. So, I think that my history is marked by lots of prayer, my upbringing, my commitment to education. I in school, actually at my magnet school, was my moment of transformation. So actually, it came from a white male who I still keep in contact with today, who was my seventh grade teacher. And I wanted to subscribe to the statistic that was supposed to surround me. So trying to skip class, not performing my best. He's like 6'3". He got down in my face and he said, "You can do this, and you're going to do this." Um, and I went
Wow.
home and told my mom, and she said, "He's right, and you better do it." So that didn't quite work out in my favor, but actually it did, because it was is a significant moment in my history that transformed me at a place that I was not supposed to be successful at. And so, education, my faith, the grounding that my mother said, those are marks of my history.
Well, thank you, Tanya. That was really nice. And I see Mr. Gibbons, you have joined us. Can you hear us okay? Mr. Gibbons?
Yes, and perfect. How are you doing?
Okay, well, we haven't. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can, but a little broken. We
Can
were
you hear me?
just discussing. Yes, I can hear you a little bit.
Okay. My sister just told me that, and so I'm so I
It's
worked
breaking
on this when you
up a little bit.
I said I said I worked on it because I wanted to.
I think he's still having some
Okay,
technical.
we're sorry we lost Miss. So as yeah, having some technical difficulties. So as your ladies are thinking about your early introduction and your history, how has history influenced the path that you've chosen in life? And
Um,
either of you may start.
One of the things that was most beneficial to me was when I was in high school, I got introduced to Upward Bound. And Upward Bound was one of those federal programs um, that was meant to uplift individuals who uh, had no idea or anything about knowing about college or had no idea how they were going to get to college. I mean, like I said, I was in a single family, a single parent household, had no idea how or if I was going to even be able to get to college. But Upward
Mhm.
Bound was my introduction to what it would be like to be a college student. Um, and I was in this program for 3 years throughout my high school career, and it was very beneficial to me because it it was throughout the academic year as well as and it was residential during the summers. So I was able
Mhm.
to actually live on a college campus and interact with college students. So it gave me an introduction to this is what it will be like to actually be a college student. So it gave me something to look forward to. It gave me the impetus and the actual um, gave me something to want to aspire to, that you can actually look forward to wanting to go to college. And even though I knew that I did not have any money, my family did not have the money, but what I was told by those individuals who were a part of the Upward Bound program was Work
Mhm.
hard in school, get good grades. You can get scholarships, you can get grants, and Upward Bound is certainly is going to pay for your SATs and your ACTs, and they're going to pay for all of your applications to the colleges that you want to apply to. So you don't have to worry about any of that. So that all happened. So I was able to apply to all the schools I wanted to apply to. I was My SATs were paid for, and I was able to get scholarships and grants and get into the schools that I applied to. So um, I was truly blessed to have found that program, and with good
Mhm.
counselors and good teachers behind me who were like, who saw something in me and were able to push me into actually doing this thing that got me to move forward into going to college. That's what got me into college.
Okay, thank you. And Tanya, how about you?
History what became appealing to me. I want to say the fifth grade. For some reason, the fifth grade, I knew that I wanted to be a civil rights attorney who attended Howard University. I had already had set the vision. None of that happened, but my love for history did. So I just want to point that out there. But it was fascinating to me. I wasn't my mom, bless her heart. My sister were math and science people, and I looked at the numbers and I said, "That is not me." So I really fell in love with history, and it really shaped much of my career. So for fifth grade moving forward, I excelled in history. I wanted to know more. I developed a passion for African American history. Um, I went to school and got a couple degrees in history. I taught history. And so it has really shaped. And even now, as I have transitioned professionally to really working with children and families, I see the importance and the role that history plays in their stories as we serve them. We cannot serve them without knowing their history. So it influences my work even now as I work more so in the social work field. But I am thankful for that background in history, and my love for history continues because I see the consequences of some of our historical choices. I also see the benefits and the blessings also that comes alongside history as well.
I majored in history too.
All right now.
Yeah. Um, and
So we definitely have the right people in this conversation. So understanding how important history is, and thinking of some of the great leaders of the past or present. If you had an opportunity to interview any one of your choice, either past or present, who would it be, and why would you want to interview them, and what would you like to know?
oh, I know who I would want it because I'm always quoting her, always.
Mhm.
All right.
And that would be Harriet Tubman.
Mm.
Um,
Okay.
and I am always quoting Harriet Tubman. I am always looking to her as someone who was fierce, tenacious, somebody who uh, knew her own mind, who knew what she wanted to do, who knew where she wanted to go, who understood what freedom meant and was going to get there no matter what, no matter the circumstances.
Mhm.
Um, and um, and I'm like I said, I'm always quoting Harriet. And here's this little tiny woman um, who uh, her last straw was when the owners were planning to sell off the remainder of her family. And it's like, okay, that's enough. I've had enough of this,
Mhm.
and just took off. And her mantra being, I'll be free or die.
Mhm.
You know, um, and said that to her passengers. You will be free, or you'll die. That this is just too important. And what they're One of my favorite quotes of hers is, "I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they had known they were slaves."
Mhm.
And that is so very, very true of our community. Um, and but it is not the fault of our community uh, to not understand how slavery so warped our mind,
Mhm.
and how we were stripped of so much.
Mhm.
We weren't just stripped of our names or of our language
Mhm.
or of our history. We were stripped to the core as a people,
Yes.
to even understanding that of how we turn against each other
Mhm.
um, and destroy each other.
Mhm.
And that all of that goes back to that institution known as slavery.
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm. Yes, indeed. Yes,
Well,
And
indeed.
I'll come back to another one of her sayings later,
sure.
because
Oh, okay.
it
Well,
was
you
my
did
New
say
Year's
you quoted
resolution.
her often.
But
Well,
Mhm.
hold on. Before Tanya, I allow you an opportunity. I see Mr. Gibbons has joined us, and I'd like to hear his perspective. So, welcome, Mr. Gibbons. You are a poet, and we were just kind of connecting with, how has history in telling your story. If you could just share your story, um, your personal history with us now, if you don't mind.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for just including me. And I have to, really have to shout my sister out because during the summer we would get together, and we come from strong people. So although I lived in Florida, she lived in Jersey. When we would get together over the summer, we would connect, and it grew and evolved into this wonderful kind of brother sister relationship because I'm the oldest of all of my father's children. And so I take ownership with that by being the big brother. I I take ownership of that because it's important for me to be able to for them to be able to ask me a question or depend on me for certain things. And when Virginia was very small, I remember that she loved her brothers and she wanted to be with us. And we would turn her to pictures. So that my things. And a few other things is that, I just never read before the court of Manhattan, but just a few days ago they asked me to read for Black. And so I stood in front of all of these lawyers and judges and all of these that are that
So, Robert,
of my
you're
life
breaking up a
and
little
where
bit.
things have evolved and just God.
Oh, we're so sorry.
um,
He lost his connection. It was sounded like he was getting ready to say something really good.
Yes. Yes.
We hope he's able to rejoin us and finish
Yes.
his story. So I would have loved to have heard what he had to say. So with that, Tanya, who would you be inclined to meet and why, and what would you like to find out?
Um, One of the women that I would love to meet, one of the women of the civil rights movement who is not as known, is Claudette Colvin. I did a part of my master thesis on her and just what the fire she ignited, sitting before Rosa Parks sat. What impressed me about Claudette is her youth. Um, whether she knew at that time that she was the launching party for this bus boycott that was going to be a spark that ignite the civil rights movement, who knows? But I find her story to be so interesting and fascinating, and I would love to know why. I think There's so many perspectives on she was encouraged by the NAACP, but then they found Rosa. She was just tired. Like what part, what, and then how she felt with seeing Rosa Parks as the mother figure of the movement and how she felt about that. But what most impressed me is her youth and how our young people can be so impactful and powerful. Um, they don't even know it. And I don't know if Claudette knew it or not, but her story always fascinates me. So she would be the one I would love to sit down with and chat with.
Well, I thank you for sharing that name because I doubt very many of us even recall her. So thank you for enlightening us. And Robert, I see that you joined us. So if you'd like to finish the story that you were talking, as you had begun to talk about, I think you were getting ready to talk about you were asked to participate in the program for Black History Month. So if you could continue with that story, sir.
Yeah, sure. I did a whole lot this Black History Month, and I just really appreciate, you know, the evolution of me, the person that grew up in Florida, um, living in New York City, and everybody wants me to come and read for Black History Month. And so I did that, but I just wanted to share a little bit about to the sister that just said about Claudette Colvin. You know, Claudette lived in the Bronx here in New York City. And what she did was she she was pregnant and she was dark skinned. And
Mm.
so the NAACP at that time is not going to promote a dark skinned sister. You see what I'm saying? So that's that's the issue that I have. And I'm because I majored in history and history African American studies is my passion. And so, you know, when people ask me these questions, then I have to address it. So when you talked about Claudette, I know her. She lives in the Bronx. She's still alive. She has a children's book out. You know what I'm saying? So I know all of these things because I am passionate about blackness. You know what I'm saying? And I guess I got it from my father, Robert Gibbons the elder. I guess I got it from him, you know, but that's where I get it from. And so I'm just gonna I'm just gonna, you know, come down because I get very passionate. I'm just gonna say that thank you so much for having me. So the abolitionist geographies would be for me from Florida coming from Florida to New York, it would be James Weldon Johnson. It would be him because he wrote the Negro National Anthem. It would be
Okay.
Zora Neale Hurston. It would be Zora Neale Hurston too, because she has a long tradition of just vernacular and anthropology. And it would also be Augusta Savage. And Augusta Savage was a sculptor in Harlem. So she came from Florida, from the Everglades where I come from. So I know their work. I call and I did not say to you, this group today that I have to remember my ancestors. I have to remember my grandmother Mattie Gibbons and my grandfather Jethro Gibbons. And I have to remember my grandmother Bercy Edwards and my grandfather Sammy Edwards because they mean so much to me. And I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'm sure as we all are reminiscing of our history, we do know the legacy of the people before us. For me, my grandparents and my great grandparents as well. And on the heels of my grandmother being 104 in another month, actually this month in March, and just her perspective and what she has seen from 1919. And seeing those things of Jim Crow and feeling as a dark skinned woman, feeling a particular way, made to feel like she was less than. And, you know, some of those concepts that we have as young people carry us into adult life, especially for her and her generation. So with that, as we think about, you know, current events, and, you know, Robert, you did mention how color and complexion comes to mind, but as we think about not just those societal things, but those things that are happening right now with legislative issues and some of the things that we're seeing taken away, what current rulings or actions are you most bothered by that will impact us as African Americans?
For me, it is the attempts to remove Black history from the classroom. I am so infuriated with that. Why our story? And that bothers me to no ends. It's happening in Florida. It's happening in Texas, Virginia. It's
Mhm.
happening, and it's unfortunate, because what you're doing is. I think about the like we were speaking about the folks that's coming behind us and the generations that are coming behind us, where our stories will be lost. Um, Robert was just speaking truth to power about those notable figures. And I have a nephew who's 4. Will he even know those names if they're successful? As somebody who taught it at the college level, I absolutely refuse to teach it at the public school level. I said absolutely not, because you're not going to stifle my voice as an educator, because we have SOLs and people who don't want to hear this and people who don't want to hear that. So for me, that is a ruling, a potential part, and it seems to be gaining traction. And that's what's scary is that this could actually happen sooner than later. And so for me, yeah, so I got a little height in my tone there, because I just hate it. My husband has to hear about it all the time. So that for me, it would be that.
And the
Thank you. And
reason why that is happening is because let me back it up and tell a little story. And it's not even my story. It comes from a speech that Martin Luther King gave 4 days before Memphis. And and in that speech, he talked about um, a Rip Van Winkle going up the mountain. Um, and when he went up that mountain, there was a picture of King George III. But and when he came back down the mountain, having slept for 20 years, there was a picture of George Washington. So what Rip didn't understand is that in that 20 years that he had slept, there had been a whole revolution that had occurred. And in this speech, Dr. King talked about how sometimes we don't even understand as a people that we can sleep through a revolution.
Mhm.
Um, and that and that's what's happening to us now. We have been sleeping through a revolution. And in the course of this revolution, we have seen people elected to office who have an agenda. And those people are Ron DeSantis, it's Glenn Youngkin, it was Donald Trump, and it's folks like that whose agenda is to erase us from the history book, you know. And if we don't wake up from this sleeping in this revolution, we're going to be erased from the history books. Because and if we don't vote, and that's what has happened, because we didn't vote, we got Donald Trump. We didn't
mhm.
vote, we got Glenn Youngkin, whose first order of business was Executive Order number 1, which said that he did not want inherently divisive concepts being taught in our classrooms. And when you ask him, well, what does that mean? They can't define it. But I can
Mhm.
define it.
Nope.
Yep.
I can define it. It means that they don't want folks teaching about us.
Yes.
And just last week, he told
I
his
must say,
secretary
I must
of
say to you, Dr.
education
Hopkins,
to
I
not
was
to
like,
go and look at the
because
AP
I did,
Black History class, to determine whether or not it was in was it going to align with with his executive order number 1, which was this: do not teach inherently divisive concepts.
Mhm.
And if it's not in line with that, then you are not going to teach the AP African American History course.
Mhm.
You know, so we have to be very concerned about who we're putting in these offices. And they aren't
Absolutely.
just starting with the governor's office; they're starting at the school board level.
Yes.
Mhm.
So we have to be very careful about who we're putting on these school boards at the
Mm,
city council level, who we're putting on city councils,
yeah.
who we're electing as mayors, because these are the folks who are being elected to these offices who are making sure that we're being erased from the history books.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's enough to be said with
So glad
how
you
we are
said that.
also absolutely, and then looking at even more so our history is our presence even today, and
Yes.
some
Right.
of the things that happens against us as African Americans, walking while black, driving while
Mm,
jogging
mm-hmm.
while black.
Mm.
Sleeping,
So it's not
sleeping while
Sleeping while
black.
Right.
black.
sleeping
Mm-hmm.
while black. So
Yes.
so that it's a whole process of not just taking away the history, it's taking away our presence.
Mm.
So Robert, I see that you're back. So
Yes,
my
thank you.
question was, what do you think about any current events that are happening, rulings or actions that are taking place that you are most bothered by that will impact us as African Americans?
Well, I'm a scientist of blackness. So I'm gonna always, engage with the culture and look at the theories and the processes that are coming forth. I think I told you all that I, I really appreciate Zora Neale Hurston. Appreciate Augusta, and I appreciate James Russell Johnson. So they all came to New York. They followed the same trail that I followed. Very, very, what can I say, a very volatile place. People come here thinking that, okay, so I am going to be famous, I'm going to be a celebrity, I'm going to be all of this, all of that. I always remember what my grandmother said. My grandmother was a street evangelist. She would go to the streets and preach. So she would take
Mm-hmm.
me because I would beat the drums with her. So my grandmother was a Pentecost. She was apostolic. She was apostolic. So you can imagine growing up with an apostolic grandmother, there was not many things I was going to be able to do. I mean, as far as she trained me in the scripture, she trained me in oratory, she trained me in singing songs, and she also trained me in testimony. And so I use all of that in my work now. I use the testimony, I use the black preacher that's in me. I also use the scripture, and I also use the song in my work. And so it's because of her and what she did. And so I say to you all that I, I'm, I have so much gratitude because I know blackness. I'm involved in it, and it's in my life. It's all around me. Everywhere I go, everywhere I do, I'm looking for it. You know what I'm saying? I went to the library just yesterday to an artist retreat, and I was looking for the black advertisement from the 1800s. And of course, I have a strong affection for Paul Laurence Dunbar. He's one of my favorite, and Richard Wright and James Baldwin and Langston Hughes. But I also, have a strong affection for Ida B. Wells. And so when I start going and start digging through the archives of these major repositories, then I start looking for stuff that has never been written about. You know what I'm saying? Because I used to beat myself up. Let me tell you, I used to beat myself up and used to say, "Oh, they didn't accept me." I went to Europe for the first time in 2017. I won a writing fellowship in Europe, and it was very competitive, and they accepted me, and I went, and when we got to the end of the session, this is one of the readers, so that you had to select from a group of people that
Sounds like Robert has experienced more of that those technical issues. So, Dr. Locke, Senator Dr. Locke, you raised a very good point about voting at all levels. So I will ask or start with you. What would be the call to action you would ask of us as African Americans and as viewers today?
We must be advocates. We must be advocates of change. It's not enough for us to say, let somebody else do it. Uh, we have to do it. We have to be the voices that are in the city halls, in the planning commission meetings, in the school board meetings. If we want to see um, the gun violence stop, then we have to be the voices out there asking for it to stop. If we want to see criminal justice reform happen, then we have to be out there making sure that we're the voices asking for it to stop and to see that it happens. If we want to see our voting rights solidified and stay in place, then we have to be the ones out there making sure that that happens. If we want to make sure that our Black history stays in the history books, then we have to be the ones out there making sure that that is what happens. Otherwise, we're gonna we're gonna keep sleeping through this revolution, and we're gonna wake up and we're gonna be erased and completely gone. We have to be the advocates. We have to be the voices out there demanding, that what we want to happen, that it happens. Nobody is going to speak for us but us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Dr. Law. And Tanya, what would be your call to action?
It would be very similar to Dr. Locke's advocating, the power in advocating. Um, if you feel like the gun violence in your in the city is too big, start with your family. If your babies are falling asleep to gunshots, that is not normal. That is not okay. Start where you are. My mother, God rest her soul, when we were preparing to just transition her, we found so much literature. She was the public housing president. She advocated for security in our neighborhood. The city was too big for her, so she started at home. So advocate for your family. That means go to the classroom, right? Go and advocate for your child with their teacher. Go to your rental office and advocate there. Um, Tell your story. That is a part of advocating. I am a big believer in telling. That's my call to action. Tell your story, speak your truth, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly, because that is an important part of advocating. When you tell your story to someone who will listen, you are igniting change. You are making things better for those who are coming behind you. That's what I constantly think of, is those who are coming behind me. I had the privilege and the blessing to learn about African American history. I want my nephew to as well. And so it starts here, and it starts with us. And it starts, if you feel like things are too big, bring it down to home. Start there. So advocate, speak your truth at the polls, to your to your classrooms, to your family members, to the very community that you live in. The more you advocate, the more that you may not see the fruits of your labor, but maybe your grandbabies will, maybe your nieces, your nephews, your friends will. So
Thank you. So I'm sorry. I think we did lose our other panelist, Mr. Gibbons, and would have loved to have heard his perspective. So I think you've given us a great deal of information to take with us today in sharing your history and how your history formed where you are today, and understanding how important it is for us to know our history and to keep advocating that our history be repeated. I'm from what Robert was saying, his grandmother. Our grandmother said, I'm going to give you all our history of our family. So it was always a nice story time to hear the legacy before them, especially as trying to be landowners in Southern Georges County. So I totally understand what that struggle was like, and then to try to build a reputation and have a business and be respected as African Americans when they didn't even think. So I appreciate you ladies and your perspective this evening. And here we are in the remaining hours of Black History Month. hearing your history and how you're making contributions every day to make our history count. If we have any questions that anyone would like to pose of our panelists, we welcome those questions. You can type the questions in the chat. We'll give you a few minutes if that's possible. Are there any last words? I know Dr. Locke, you have an engagement. Oh, Robert, are you back? Okay. Mr. Gibbons, are you making your way back to us? I see you on the monitor. I don't know if you are still having some issues. But if there's anything that you ladies have as parting comments, please share them before we end the night. I don't see any questions. But if you have anything, any parting words, any last bit of advice or comments that you may have.
I told you that I love Harriet. So and my New Year's resolution was is from Harriet, and that is don't ever get into an argument or a prolonged conversation with anyone that Harriet would have left behind.
I like
Okay.
that.
Okay. Anything from you, Tanya? You want to quote anybody?
I like that. Yes. When you know you hit your history, you can shape your future. So spend time with those ancestors that we talked about. Spend time with the seasoned folks in your life because they can help you charter your path. There's power in your story. So always remember that.
Thank you so much. Oh, Tammy says she totally agrees with you, Dr. Locke. And Chef Reggie said, thank you for sharing your stories. So with that, on behalf of Why Not, who always is about the business of informing and providing opportunities for learning and hearing it from so many different perspectives. We thank you for joining us today. My name is Cynthia Hawkins, something I didn't tell everybody at the beginning. My name is Cynthia Hawkins. And as a true believer of community, of outreach, I'm so grateful to have learned from you, ladies, and hear from you, Robert, when we could, your perspective and your stories about your grandmother, who are definitely inspiration to us all as we think of what history means. And it's always not just the names that we hear, but those that are closest to us who build history with us. And each one of us have the ability every day to make history. So learning about what has passed, but just remembering that tomorrow and today, we always have the gift to continue to make history, because for someone who's looking at us, we are their history. So make sure the legacy that we're leaving and the example that we're setting is one that's to be emulated. So with that, I thank you for your time. Dr. Locke, you'll be on time for your engagement. So thank you so much. And it was a pleasure meeting you. Robert, it was a pleasure hearing your stories, and thank you so much. And with that, have a great evening until we are able to do this again. So be well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.